Delegates and officials filed the halls of Baku Stadium as negotiations on climate resumed at the COP29 summit for the third day. Heads of government continue to deliver national statements while rich nations decide on the mega climate funding package. The leaders from climate-vulnerable countries, including the Maldives, have warned that the small island nations need the finance COP to deliver. Now, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres told small island leaders at COP29 that they have every right to be angry.
You have every right to be angry, and I am too. You are on the sharp end of a colossal injustice, an injustice that sees the very future of your islands threatened by rising seas, your people pounded by record hurricanes, your economies torn apart, and development gains left in tatters. This is an injustice perpetrated by the few. The G20 accounts for around 80% of global emissions, and it is an injustice that must end.
Leaders of nations like Pakistan, Croatia, Colombia, which suffered through the most devastating effects of climate change, spoke at the summit talking about the urgent need of climate funding to avoid climate disasters.
Thank you.
If we continue in the same paradigm, that the financial structure and that the economic structure can continue the same for us to tackle this crisis, then at the end we will not be really resolving anything. And that's why year after year, what we see is that we are failing. We really need a reform that is deep and that puts the financial system and the logic and the rules of the game, the economic rules of the games, at the scale of this crisis.
Over the past year, catastrophic floods in Spain, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as in southern Croatia, have shown the devastating impact of rising temperatures. The Mediterranean, one of the most vulnerable regions, calls for urgent action.
Pakistan is one of those countries which hardly contribute 0.5% of emissions, global emissions, and yet we are vulnerable and in the list of those 10 countries which can, God forbid, face this kind of devastation again.
Across Europe and across the world, our citizens are faced with unprecedented climate shocks. We need more resources to prepare, to respond in time in order to save lives and livelihoods, and to help people and communities rebuild after disaster. We cannot focus so much on 2050 that we forget 2024.
It must consider the special circumstances of small island developing states. It must include adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage, and increase contributions to it. As we approach the next round of nationally determined contributions, developed nations must increase their ambition to close the emissions and finance gap and align with the 1.5-degree goal.
Although the Russian president skipped the COP29 summit, Russian Prime Minister did attend the summit, and here's what he had to say.
It is important that the energy transition proceeds without compromising the development of low-income countries. Global warming should not be used as a pretext for unfair competition or restrictive practices. It is also necessary to introduce a practical mechanism for implementing international agreements. It is necessary to create a unified system for assessing the quality of climate projects.
Bangladesh interim leader Mohammad Yunus said that world leaders shouldn't be negotiating at United Nations climate talks and that countries responsible for warming up the planet should provide the funds to deal with the climate crisis.
I have been always opposed to this negotiating team. It sounds like we are here to have a bargain. There's opposing team. It's like a fish market. You'll see where to press you hard to get the best price. I said, that's a very wrong perception of the whole thing. There is no, why should there be negotiation? You cause the problem, you solve it.